12. Intercourse with beings, genii and intelligences of all spheres by mental traveling. This chapter may not be necessary for the sphere magician. However, not every reader will be able to put to practice at once all that he has read in this book. Many of the readers may first want to enlarge their theoretical learning. It is for them that these lines will serve as stimuli for enriching their knowledge. The author's book Initiation into Hermetics contains exact instructions in mental traveling. Also, the astral body's exteriorization, also called projection of the astral body, is dealt with in detail, in theory and practice. The magician will not be able to travel any further than the zone girdling the earth in his astral body, since the astral matrix is composed of the substance of the elements which, at the most, are able to resist the oscillations of the zone girdling the earth. Thus the magician will not imagine that he can place himself, in his astral body, beyond the zone girdling our earth, for this is something that is impossible. The sphere magician with practical experience will know that the astral body is confined by divine providence to the laws of the zone girdling the earth, and that it cannot break these laws. Moreover, the astral body depends on the space principle. The magician will find this verified when visiting the zone girdling the earth. The magician can place himself with his astral body into the world of the elements and visit any place on our planet, no matter whether on or under the earth. His astral body is even able to resist the most subtle oscillations of the zone girdling the earth, but he will soon realize that he cannot go any further than this zone. If he dared to leave it in his astral body, with his physical body meanwhile lying on the physical plane, remaining in contact with the astral body by the astral matrix, the experiment would result in the instant splitting of the astral matrix and the magician's instant physical death. It would then be useless to try to revive the astral matrix, the physical body having become a victim of the elements. If, on the other hand, it so happened that the projection of the astral body should succeed in spite of the magician's physical death, and that the mental body together with the astral body were to penetrate beyond the zone girdling the earth by force, the mental matrix would rend asunder, the mental body would be parted from the astral body, the latter again becoming a victim of the elements in the astral world, which would consume such a dead astral body within a short period of time. It would then be impossible for the magician to return to his astral body, and his spirit would be banned in the sphere appropriate to his last state of development. Such an act of force committed by a magician would be severely punished by the jugs of the Saturn sphere. A similar act of force and catastrophe is the conscious separation of the astral matrix from the physical body, or of the mental matrix from the mental body, which has already been termed in the Bible as a sin against the spirit. The true meaning of the words against the spirit from the Hermetic point of view is only known to few people. For it is true that such cases are rare. Generally, the urge for self-preservation is the reason why the bounds are hardly ever exceeded in this respect. Moreover, each magician has an intelligence acting as his guardian angel who warns him in time from such karmic catastrophes. This explanation, in a way, also throws light on the Faustus tragedy, which is quite clear to every initiate. Here are a few facts with respect to mental traveling. The sphere magician who has absorbed the author's first work Initiation into Hermetics has learnt how to separate his mental body. He has been told at the beginning of this book, the author's second work, that in practice this is only possible if he has a perfect command of the facts laid down in Book 1. The magician has learned to set free his mental body and to wander first into the mental sphere of our physical world. After sufficient practice he extended his visits to the astral plane around our physical world, and after that he became capable of visiting, with his mental body, any place of our physical world where he wished or desired to be, where he wanted his spirit to be placed. Then he visited the kingdoms of the elements, having taken on, for that purpose, the shape of the beings of the elements by force of imagination, thus enabling them to see, hear and feel him. One after the other he visited the kingdom of the gnomes, the kingdom of the undines, roamed the regions of the air with its sylphs or fairies, and finally traveled through the kingdom of the salamanders to get also that region under his control. After that the magician learned to elevate his mental body into the planes, above all filled with the desire to get to the zone girdling the earth. After some training, his mental body rose into a vertical position and the magician saw himself transferred to that zone, according to his wish. Having reached the zone girdling the earth, the oscillations of which the magician's mental body successfully resisted, the magician soon was surrounded by beings of that zone. Later he was able to get to know, one after the other, the heads of the zone girdling the earth, whose names and seals are contained in this book, thus taking up contact with them. They made the magician acquainted with all the facts regarding that zone and taught him how he could get to the plane next to theirs, i.e. the moon sphere. The magician is able to betake himself to the moon sphere without a guide. He must at first get his mental body influenced with the color of the moon sphere, i.e. get it dyed silvery white, with a slight touch of violet. As soon as he has his body completely impregnated with the accumulated light of silvery white and slightly violet color, he is again raised into a vertical position, this time wishing to wander to the moon sphere. When first trying to raise himself from the zone girdling the earth into the moon sphere, the magician will have the sensation of a rotary motion. Repeated training will take this feeling of dizziness from him, and the feeling of pressure in the solar plexus region will also cease. The elevation itself is instantaneous. Suddenly the magician finds himself in a sea of light of a silvery violet color and is already placed into the moon sphere. His desire to get into touch with the intelligences that does not remain unfulfilled. If the magician calls, in this silvery-colored vibration, for one of the intelligences mentioned and described in this book, he will soon see it appear. The contact is the same as in the zone girdling the earth. If the magician wants a being from another sphere to do a certain thing, he should work out his plans first in the zone girdling the earth and should not betake himself to the relevant sphere without having sufficiently pondered the matter. For during his initial operations his consciousness usually loses its independence by the different color vibration of the sphere. Only by repeated intercourse with the same being will the magician get used to the pressure he experiences in that sphere, and his independent thinking will no longer be influenced by it to such a great extent. After the magician has had experience with all of the 28 intelligences of the moon sphere, he will have become complete master of it, and he can then change its influence within himself by either increasing or diminishing its vibrations, in order to suit the extent of power of the beings he is getting into contact with. During his initial visits to the moon sphere, the magician will become aware that its 28 original intelligences possess a power of radiation, an inner expansiveness, that almost paralyzes his mental body. In order to be able to stand up to this influence, the magician must take on a vibration suiting the original intelligences of the moon. This is done by an appropriate condensation of light power of the moon sphere whilst the magician is still in the zone girdling the earth, for otherwise the magician could not get into contact with these intelligences without having to fear the accompanying effects of paralysis. If the magician has become thoroughly acquainted with the moon sphere, he travels, in his mental body, to the next sphere, the Mercury sphere, after having influenced his mental body in the moon sphere with the yellow-orange color oscillation of the Mercury, i.e. after having accumulated the light power of the Mercury zone. He then gets into contact with the individual genii of the Mercury zone, one after the other, in much the same way as he has done previously with the intelligences of the moon sphere. After repeated elevation to the Mercury zone, it is no longer necessary for the magician to get there via the moon sphere, for he now can impregnate his mental body with the Mercury vibration whilst still in the zone girdling the earth, and he may travel from there directly into the Mercury zone. If he succeeds in getting into contact with at least 30 genii of that zone, he is able to carry out the elevation into the Mercury zone straight from our physical world, i.e. by carrying through the color impregnation, i.e. the accumulation of light power with the Mercury vibration, about his physical body, and he can directly and at once betake himself to the Mercury zone, without having to use the zone girdling the earth or the moon sphere as transit stations. During his intercourse with genii of the Mercury zone, the magician will not feel such a strong paralyzing effect of their radiation power, since the Mercury zone is, in a way, analogous to the mental body, as has been shown under the chapter dealing with the cosmic hierarchy. The magician should not think of betaking himself into the next sphere, unless he has become absolute master over these three spheres, i.e. the zone girdling the Earth, the Moon sphere and the Mercury zone. The reason why I pay so much attention to these three spheres is, as already pointed out, firstly because the zone girdling the Earth has an analogous connection with the physical body, with its fate; secondly because the Moon sphere has a similar connection with the astral body, with its maturity, its character, its equilibrium, etc., and thirdly because the Mercury zone has a similar connection with the mental body. In the Mercury zone, the stepping stone for travels to higher spheres, the sphere magician then carries through the accumulation of light power from the next sphere, the Venus sphere, before he betakes himself to it. The accumulation of the light power of the Venus sphere must result in a wonderful emerald green color. If he has not become a victim of the temptations in the Venus sphere and has thus become a master of love, he can place himself directly from this physical world into the sphere in question. He must, however, carry out the accumulation of the light power of the Venus sphere in his mental body already beside his physical body. The same naturally also applies to the next sphere, the Sun sphere, which is the sphere that is most difficult to reach, as the beings of that sphere all have such a strong accumulation of light that the magician who has not provided for a sufficient accumulation of the light power of the Sun, i.e. an accumulation equivalent to the glowing Sun, cannot resist the vibrations of the Sun Genii. If the magician got into touch with the genius of the Sun without having sufficiently prepared himself by an appropriate light impregnation of his mental body, the glowing power of light rays would throw him back into his physical body and his mental matrix would, as a consequence, lose its equilibrium, and disharmonies would be the inevitable result. Such disharmonies would soon become obvious by various accompanying effects in the astral body, sometimes even in the physical body. Under certain circumstances a nervous breakdown would be the result. But also other psychic disadvantages might show up. Therefore the magician will consider my warning absolutely necessary and realize that it is not possible to betake oneself into other spheres without knowing their laws of analogy and their application, and without having a sound knowledge of the magic of evocation. After having got the Sun sphere absolutely under his control, the magician will visit the adjacent sphere of Mars. In order to avert any danger from the beginning, only the names, not the seals, of the intelligences of that sphere have been published in this book. The Mars sphere has a light vibration of a ruby red color. This means that the accumulation of the light power for the mental body must also result in a ruby red color. Every magician who has learnt to master the Sun sphere without any risks may visit all the spheres that lie beyond it, one after the other, with only one exception, the most dangerous sphere of Saturn. Visits to the Jupiter sphere are carried out in the same way, except for the accumulation of light power, which has to result in a sky blue color. Should the magician also want to visit the Saturn sphere, he must carry out the appropriate accumulation of light power for his mental body in a dark violet color. Regarding the Uranus sphere, the accumulation of light power for the mental body has to be lilac colored, and for visits to the Pluto sphere, the last sphere of significance, it has to be colored in a light gray. The other spheres are colorless. The magician who has proceeded this far and has learnt to carry out the accumulation of light powers of the spheres may visit the other planets without any special coloring of his mental body and get into contact with the intelligences living there. As soon as he gets near the sphere he plans to visit, he will perceive, by force of transcendental clairvoyance, the color of that sphere, thus being able to carry through the appropriate accumulation of light power in the universe, before entering the sphere in question. There exist oscillations the colors of which cannot be compared with any of the colors known to us and which therefore cannot be described. Nevertheless, the transcendental eye sees them and can cause the appropriate light oscillation to be evoked in the mental body, making the contact with that sphere and the beings living there. This short description may be sufficient for the genuine initiate. Details in this respect have never been published in Hermetic literature, and up to now only few initiates are acquainted with this knowledge. The sphere magician who has learnt to carry through all this in practice knows that the preceding chapters contain no fancy stories, for he has been able to convince himself of the truth whenever he wishes. I have written down only my personal experience.